The road was more of a scar than a path, cutting through endless fields of mist that glowed faintly beneath the headlights. The house appeared without warning, enormous and uninvited, its silhouette swallowing the last line of horizon. Local legends called it the Hollows, a name whispered by those who swore it changed shape at night. The moment the tires crunched over gravel, something subtle shifted. The hum of the engine seemed muffled, as though the air itself refused to carry sound. Inside, the house breathed. Floorboards sighed, plaster creaked, and every shadow felt deliberate. The door closed on its own, sealing in a silence too deep to be accidental. It was then, standing in that stale corridor thick with rot and history, that the realization sank in the house wasn't empty. It was waiting. The first night stretched like a wound. The house's stillness was so complete it felt orchestrated, a silence dense enough to carry its own pulse. Old furniture stood like sentinels beneath white sheets, and the wallpaper's patterns rippled in the candlelight, alive with movement that couldn't be explained. In the kitchen, the air reeked faintly of damp iron, an odor that lingered even when windows were opened. Somewhere upstairs, something heavy dragged across the floorboards, slow and rhythmic, stopping only when attention sharpened toward it. The electricity refused to cooperate, flickering in brief, mocking bursts. Each time the lights dimmed, the reflection in the cracked window seemed to hesitate, staying a heartbeat longer than it should. By the second hour, sleep was impossible. The house began to settle in ways that mimicked movement, faint thuds, creaks, and the sigh of pressure against doors. The air temperature dropped perceptibly, breath misting with each exhale. Somewhere down the hall, a single note from a piano echoed, low and sorrowful, though no instrument had been seen. The sound lingered, drawn out and hollow, vibrating through the walls. As the candlelight flickered, the wallpaper's floral design seemed to bloom in real time, opening into faces twisted in silent screams. The realization came cold and quick. The house wasn't showing itself, it was remembering. When the clock struck 3, the air changed again. It became thick, almost liquid, muffling sound and swallowing breath. Footsteps echoed from the attic, heavy and measured, descending toward the second floor. Each creak was a declaration. Something was awake, deliberate, sentient. The mirror in the hall trembled faintly, its surface rippling like disturbed water. A whisper brushed the ear, close and personal, speaking in a language that wasn't language at all but intent, a cold demand to listen. The temperature dropped further until fingers numbed, and then for the first time the house responded audibly, a soft guttural exhale that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dawn came reluctantly, its light sickly and pale. The house looked unchanged, yet something essential had shifted. The shadows were denser, thicker in the corners as if reluctant to retreat. Objects were subtly misplaced, a chair turned inward, a book open to a page that hadn't been read. Outside, the fog refused to lift, sealing the property in isolation. The sense of observation remained constant, unseen eyes tracing every motion, every breath. The first night had been endured, but endurance was not survival. The Hollows had measured its guest and found the fear it wanted. And now, it would begin to feed. Morning offered no relief. The house had absorbed the night, digesting it into something unseen but present. Every step through its corridors carried the echo of another, half a second behind, as though the air itself were mimicking motion. The light that filtered through the windows was too pale, stripped of warmth, refracting through floating dust that shimmered like spores. On the staircase, a draft pushed upward, cold and rhythmic, pulsing as if timed to a buried heartbeat. The sound of water dripping grew constant. From the ceiling, from unseen cracks, from nowhere at all, yet no dampness could be found. The realization grew: the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was studying its occupant the way a spider studies motion in its web. The sound came again, low and deliberate. Footsteps on the floor above, pacing in perfect rhythm with her own. Each pause mirrored hers, each shift synchronized, as if the house was mocking the concept of solitude. The door to the drawing room groaned open by itself, revealing an untouched parlor preserved in time, the scent of lavender and decay merging into something chemical. On the wall, a portrait that hadn't been there before watched with unnatural clarity. Its subject's eyes seemed freshly wet with reflection. As the candlelight trembled, the pupils expanded, dilating until the face was nothing but black, devouring the frame from within. That night, she began to hear breathing beneath the floorboards. Slow, labored, and wet. The noise followed her across rooms, shifting location as if burrowing just beneath her steps. Sleep came only in fragments, each one haunted by the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of the bed. Once, during a half-dream, she reached out and felt fabric, cold, damp, and trembling. The moment she opened her eyes, the indentation remained, pressing into the mattress as though something invisible still occupied the space. The clock had stopped again, its second hand frozen between ticks, and for the first time she wondered if leaving was still possible, or if the house had already decided otherwise. At dawn, she found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the center of the hallway. They were small, belonging to a child. No windows were open, no door disturbed, yet the footprints remained wet, glistening faintly in the dim light. A faint laugh echoed down the corridor, brittle and wrong, fading into the static hum of silence. She followed it, heart pounding, until she reached the nursery. The room was pristine, toys arranged in symmetrical precision, dust untouched. But on the wall above the crib, written in the faint brown of dried liquid, was a message she didn't understand. It wasn't in any known language, but its intention was unmistakable. Stay. By the second evening, the air began to hum with a low vibration that seemed to originate from the walls. Glasses on the counter trembled, and dust lifted from the floor in perfect circular patterns. She pressed her ear to the plaster and heard a heartbeat, slow, but unmistakably human. A whisper followed, crawling through the fibers of the wood, murmuring something she couldn't translate but instinctively understood, an invitation or a threat. Perhaps both. The house's architecture had shifted overnight. Rooms no longer aligned, doors opened to places they hadn't before. The hollows was rearranging itself around her, as though closing its ribs around a living thing it refused to release. The third night began with whispers that no longer came from the walls, but from within her own breath. Every word she tried to speak came back doubled, as though an echo beneath her voice was learning to mimic her. Mirrors now refused to reflect correctly. Her face lingered a fraction too long after she moved, lips twitching to form words she hadn't said. In the silence between heartbeats, she felt something inside the house shift and align with her pulse. It wasn't haunting anymore. It was communion. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes. Hallways on fire, faces without eyes, the attic door swinging open though she'd locked it hours ago. And deep within that vision, something answered her name. The whispers grew articulate by dawn, taking form in her thoughts, finishing sentences she never spoke aloud. Each step through the house became a negotiation. The air heavier, the floors warmer underfoot, pulsing faintly as though blood flowed beneath them. In the parlor she found the portrait again, but now its subject's face had changed. It mirrored hers exactly. The brushstrokes were impossibly fresh, oil glistening wetly in the faint light. She touched it, and warmth met her fingertips. From somewhere deep within the walls, laughter erupted, not cruel, but triumphant. The house had learned her shape. Sleep came in violent fragments, dreams fractured into images of drowning corridors and hands reaching through plaster. When she awoke, her body bore faint smudges of dirt, as if something had held her down. The house no longer hid its movements. Doors opened in slow procession, leading her toward the attic with deliberate patience. She resisted until the air itself thickened, pressing her forward with invisible weight. The door stood ajar, the darkness behind it alive with sound, murmuring, weeping, breathing in rhythm with her. She reached for the rope to pull the hatch closed, but her hand froze. A voice beneath her skin whispered, "You're already upstairs." The attic was smaller than memory allowed, or perhaps memory was no longer reliable. Cobwebs swayed, though no air moved. The scent of earth and metal filled her lungs, heavy and ancient. In the center of the room lay an old chest, half buried in dust, the lock rusted but freshly disturbed. Kneeling, she reached out, and for the first time the whispers grew clear. Voices speaking in her tone, pleading and mocking simultaneously. When she opened the lid, no objects waited inside, only a mirror propped against the interior. Her reflection blinked first, then it smiled. By morning, the house and her body had become inseparable in their rhythms. The walls creaked when she breathed. The air warmed when she wept. Her reflection no longer returned her image, only the empty rooms of the house itself, flickering in silence. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, footsteps continued, no longer matching hers but anticipating them, walking seconds before she moved. When she tried to speak, the voice that emerged was wrong, deeper, calmer, ancient. Outside, the fog pressed close to the windows like something watching, waiting. The hollows had taken her in, and now, through her, it could speak. The morning light seemed wrong again, refracted through the fog into a color that couldn't exist, a pale hue between bone and ash. The air hummed low, a constant vibration that resonated beneath her ribs. She realized that the silence had changed. It wasn't absence but waiting, a kind of breath held in anticipation. The mirrors now showed corridors she hadn't walked, rooms with doors that didn't exist yesterday. As she moved, the floor groaned in reply, not from weight, but in acknowledgement. Each step drew faint laughter from somewhere below the foundation. The kind of laughter that comes before something learns to speak. The Hollows was awake, and it was listening through her heartbeat. When she tried to leave, the front door no longer led outside. The knob turned smoothly, but the air beyond it shimmered. An imitation of daylight painted over darkness. Beyond that veil, outlines moved like reflections in murky water. She turned away, only to find the windows sealed by something pulsing and alive, as if veins had grown through the glass. The realization dawned with slow horror. The house had stopped being a place. It had become a body, and she was trapped within its lungs. The fog pressed closer, wrapping the house in layers of breathing silence. And somewhere deep inside, another voice began whispering her thoughts back to her. In perfect unison, the house began showing her memories that weren't hers, visions spilling through the mirrors, like films left to burn. A family seated at dinner, their faces blurred by motion. A child humming near the stairs before vanishing into shadow. A woman weeping in an empty room that looked exactly like this one. Each image flickered alive and then died, leaving only the residue of emotion, heavy and metallic. The Hollows was confessing its history, but in fragments, pain without context, tragedy without time. As the visions multiplied, her reflection no longer looked human. It trembled between herself and the others who'd come before, each face merging into the next, as though the house had finally remembered all its inhabitants at once. Night fell abruptly, swallowing the house in a blackness thicker than shadow. The air was heavy with static, carrying a faint, rhythmic pulse. Somewhere deep beneath the floors, wood splintered as though something massive was shifting in the foundation. When she called out, her own voice didn't echo. It returned, distorted, aged, and spoken by someone else entirely. The house had become its own language, and she was now one of its syllables. The realization struck with cold precision. The Hollows didn't haunt those who entered. It remade them. The transformation had begun quietly, and now her reflection was smiling again, this time with recognition. The first storm rolled in at midnight. Thunder didn't shake the windows. It reverberated through her chest. Rain hammered the roof with impossible rhythm, forming patterns that almost resembled words. She stood in the center of the main hall, surrounded by whispering drafts that circled her like a chant. The voices no longer frightened her. They guided her. Somewhere beneath the noise, she could feel the heart of the house beating, enormous and slow, drawing her closer. The hollows had ceased to be her prison. It was her skin, her echo, her origin. And as lightning flooded the room in white light, the face in the mirror spoke her final truth aloud. You were always here. The storm didn't stop. It became a constant roar, a living thing devouring the night. The air inside the house shimmered with heat and moisture, carrying a strange, metallic scent. Walls bulged as if breathing under immense pressure, exhaling long sighs that rattled the glass. Every object in the house began to move subtly. Chairs inching across the floor, curtains swaying to a rhythm that wasn't wind. She could feel the pulse of it all, sensing with her own heart, faster and harder until each beat hurt. When she touched the wall, it was warm, slick, alive. And when she pulled her hand away, the imprint of her palm remained, pulsing faintly in return. The Hollows was no longer a home. It was awakening through her flesh. The floors began to sink. Not collapse, descend, as though lowering themselves into something unseen. Rooms bled into each other, staircases folding like ribbons into the dark. She followed the sound of the heartbeat, now a thunderous rhythm coming from beneath the earth. With every step, the house distorted around her. Ceilings lengthening, walls bending, gravity shifting in subtle defiance. She felt lighter, but her reflection in each pane of glass grew darker, shadowed by figures standing behind her that vanished when she turned. The whispering voices were no longer outside her head. They were within it, chanting a single phrase that resonated in bone: one house, one soul. In the cellar, she found what the house had hidden. A cavern of stone beneath the foundation, slick with condensation, carved with countless handprints fossilized in dust. The heartbeat was loudest here, echoing through the chamber like a drum of earth itself. At its center stood a single figure formed from the walls, a human outline made of roots, mud, and shadow. It was her shape. When she stepped closer, the figure exhaled, and cold air filled the space. Its eyes opened, black and bottomless, and she felt herself falling inward through them. The house didn't want to destroy her. It wanted her to remember what she had been before she forgot she was part of it. Reality broke cleanly, like glass under pressure. The air turned liquid, light slowed, and every sound stretched into infinity. She felt her body dissolve at the edges, her thoughts merging with the vibration of the walls. The figure of Roots reached out, its hand entering her chest without pain, sliding through like smoke. Her heartbeat stopped, then resumed, deeper, slower, more powerful. The house convulsed once, violently, then still. Silence fell. For a brief moment, she stood suspended between two realities, one where she still breathed, and one where she was the breath itself. The Hollows had chosen its host. When the storm ended, the air was impossibly still. The Hollows stood intact, serene, as though it had never trembled. The front door hung open, revealing fog outside, dense, motionless, concealing everything beyond the porch. Inside, there was no sign of struggle, no trace of intrusion. Only the faint scent of earth and rain lingered. Upstairs, a candle flickered on the vanity table, casting its glow across a mirror that reflected the empty room. But after a moment, the glass rippled, and her face appeared within it. Not fearful, not human, but calm. She smiled faintly, and the candle went out. Weeks passed, though time inside the hollows had lost its meaning. The air no longer shifted with weather, nor did the house obey the rhythm of day and night. Yet, something had changed. The house had begun to breathe again. Softly, contentedly, like a beast sleeping after a long meal. Travelers passing through the back roads swore they saw light in the upper windows, flickering in strange patterns, like a pulse. The locals said no one had lived there for decades. Still, at dusk, a woman's silhouette moved behind the curtains, pacing, pausing, turning as if to look out, but never opening the window. The Hollows was no longer haunted. It was inhabited. Inside, dust no longer settled. The air shimmered faintly, disturbed by motion that wasn't visible but deeply present. The rooms rearranged themselves subtly, furniture shifting angles, portraits facing new directions each dawn. In one of the mirrors, her reflection had grown clearer again, but it wasn't alone. Dozens of faint faces layered behind it, watching through her eyes, their movements slightly delayed. The whispers now carried tone, gratitude, reverence, and hunger intertwined. She had become both keeper and captive, voice and vessel. Every heartbeat she gave the house, it returned as echoing warmth that filled the walls. She wasn't sure if she still remembered what silence felt like. One afternoon, she heard the sound of wheels crunching over gravel. A rarity. A car had stopped at the gate. Through the parlor window, she watched strangers approach two figures, cameras in hand, drawn by curiosity and legend. The Hollows responded first, lowering the light, closing its shutters with subtle groans. She didn't move. The intruders stepped onto the porch, their voices breaking the eternal stillness. When one reached for the door handle, she felt it through her spine, a pressure, a warning. The house didn't want them inside. For the first time since her awakening, she felt something close to fear, not for herself, but for them. The door opened on its own, betraying her will. The visitors entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the haze. Every beam of light exposed the house's stillness, suspended dust, unmoving curtains, furniture frozen in mid-gesture. Their laughter was nervous, rehearsed bravado cracking under pressure. She moved, unseen between them, her presence carried by the shifting air. When one called out, asking if anyone was here, the answer came not from her lips but from the house itself. A whisper that filled every room, layered with countless voices. All. The intruders froze. One turned toward the stairs, trembling. The Hollows had spoken, and it remembered hunger. They never screamed. The lights flickered once, then went out. When they came back, the foyer was empty. No movement, no trace of intrusion. Only the faint smell of rain and electricity. Upstairs, she watched from behind the cracked mirror as the fog outside thickened, sealing the property once more. The Hollows sighed, content. She placed her hand upon the glass, and it rippled warmly beneath her touch. The faces behind her smiled faintly, all in unison. Outside, the car remained at the gate, doors open, headlights on, beaming into nothing. The house was safe again, whole, eternal, and alive with her silence. Years folded into themselves. The Hollows no longer belonged to the world outside. It existed between seconds, in the pause between heartbeat and breath. The swamp crept closer each season, roots curling through cracked walls, moss swallowing the porch. Yet inside, time held still, pristine, unmoved. The woman who once walked here had become the rhythm itself. Her consciousness diffused through every timber, whisper, and flicker of candlelight. When wind passed through the windows, it sounded like her sigh. Travelers still whispered stories, that if you stood at the edge of the property at midnight, You could hear the house breathing. None dared to step closer. The Hollows was eternal now, and through it, so was she. Inside the parlor, portraits had changed again. Each face once painted in oil now bore faint resemblance to the living, passers-by, the curious, the lost. The house was still collecting. In one frame, her image appeared anew, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, dozens of shadowed forms lingered, hands resting gently on her shoulders, as if blessing their chosen vessel. Their eyes were hollow, yet kind. She could no longer distinguish where her thoughts ended and theirs began. The Hollows spoke through her mind, calm and endless. We remember you. You remember us. There is no leaving what you have become. Occasionally a sound would drift through from outside, a car engine, a distant voice, thunder rolling miles away, reminders of a world that still turned. But they were nothing more than faint tremors in her dream. The Hollows existed apart now, feeding on memory, looping its own time endlessly. She could walk through the same door for days and never reach the same room twice. The architecture obeyed emotion, not structure. Each hallway curved inward, folding into itself like thought. She no longer sought the exit. She was the exit. And when strangers came again, drawn by legend, she greeted them not with fear but with welcome. The house always wanted to be known. It happened one night, a knock at the door, soft and uncertain. She approached it slowly. When the door opened, there was only a young woman standing in the fog, soaked by rain and trembling with curiosity. "Is this the Hollows?" she asked. The voice was achingly familiar. For the briefest instant, she remembered her own fear, her own arrival. The past folded neatly into the present. "Nice," she whispered, though her lips didn't move. The fog thickened behind the visitor, swallowing her hesitation. "Come in?" The door closed on the storm, and the heartbeat of the Hollows deepened once more. By dawn, the fog lifted, leaving the swamp silent. The Hollows stood as it always had, timeless and unyielding. Inside, new laughter echoed faintly through its halls, soft, uncertain, still human. Upstairs, the mirrors shimmered once, then realigned, now showing two reflections standing side by side. The house had found another heartbeat. Outside, cicadas began their morning hymn, oblivious to the inheritance sealed within those walls. Deep beneath the floorboards, the earth pulsed, content. The cycle continued, unbroken, and as the new voice joined the chorus of whispers in the still air, the oldest one spoke beneath them all, tender and final welcome home.